So in this lecture, we'll look at the question, what is Sangha? The last two lectures were focused on, the first one was focused on Buddha. So what is Buddha, or who is Buddha? And the second one was on the Dharma. What is the Dharma? And this third one is on what is the Sangha. So together, these three are known as the three treasures, or the triple gem, or the three jewels. And I like to begin with a story about Sangha and the importance of Sangha. So Sangha means community. That's one way to translate Sangha. It means community. And from a very narrow perspective, Sangha means the community of monks and nuns. So it's kind of limited to those who have taken home leaver vows. In other words, they've left the world and become monks or nuns, renunciants. That's a very narrow view of Sangha. Sangha includes much more than just that. There's a story where the Buddha was walking with his cousin Ananda. So we have to keep in mind that the Buddha made monks and nuns out of his family members. Remember, he was a prince slated to be a king of the kingdom of Magadha. And he renounced that throne, became a mendicant wanderer. But many of the people in his kingdom were attracted to him still. They knew him, they saw him growing up in the palace as Prince Siddhartha, but now he was becoming well known as the Buddha, the enlightened one, the awakened one. And they were attracted to him and they wanted to learn from him. And so many of his own relatives, including his cousins, his own son, his wife, his aunt, and several others became his disciples. And one of his disciples was named Ananda. Ananda is his cousin. And Ananda was known, he was famous in the time of the Buddha for being able to remember every word that the Buddha had ever said, ever spoken. That if he was around the Buddha when he spoke it, he was able to remember everything that he said. But it's interesting about Ananda, even though he was able to remember everything that the Buddha said, he was not considered enlightened. He didn't attain enlightenment until after the Buddha's death. So memorizing what the Buddha said obviously was not enough for awakening. But nonetheless, Ananda he did eventually attain awakening, but it didn't happen during the Buddha's lifetime. It happened after he died. So there's a difference between simply knowing what the Buddha taught. I mean, anybody could remember it and memorize it, and actually waking up or having an awakening experience. The awakening experience is not dependent on what you know. But what you know is also valuable. And so Ananda's stories were very valuable. Here's a story of Ananda walking one day with his cousin, the Buddha. And the Buddha, prior to this exchange with Ananda, was approached by one of his supporters, his lay supporters. In other words, a person who was not a monk, but received teachings from the Buddha and wanted to support the Buddha and his community, his Sangha. And he had mistakenly given alms. He had given food to a monk that was not a part of the Buddha's Sangha, the Buddha's community. And so he asked the Buddha, could you please make robes that help you to identify your disciples, so that I don't mistakenly give somebody else's disciples food. I want to support you because I believe in your teachings. I want to support you and your disciples. So the Buddha was walking then with his cousin Ananda, and the Buddha asked his cousin, what do you think? How do you think we should create our robes? What should they look like? So the robe that I'm wearing, for example. So this robe that you see me wearing, maybe you can't see it so well here, but if I lift it up, all right, this is an example of a Buddha robe. And you can see on here patterns, lines, and it looks like rectangles and squares. So the Buddha at that point had not decided how to make robes. They were walking along the rice fields in India. And keep in mind, in Asia, China, Japan, Korea, rice is a staple. Kind of like wheat is in the Western world, in Europe, Northern Europe. What do you think if we, the Buddha asked his cousin, what do you think if we made our robes in the pattern of the rice fields? And Ananda agreed. He said, yes, Buddha, let's do it. Let's create robes in the pattern of rice fields. So what you see here in this robe, this is a miniature version of a Buddha robe, right? What you see here is it's supposed to be patterned after rice fields. Now, in reality, rice fields, they go with the contours of the land. So it's not as straight as it appears to be. But this is kind of how rice paddies look. There's some long, some short, and there's paths between the rice fields. So these kind of thin rectangular shapes are the pathways between the rice fields. The symbolism of this, one is that all things are connected, right? Every rice field is connected with all the others. And if you want to have your rice field irrigated, you had to have good relationship with the person next to you because they were all connected. The other meaning, first meaning is that all things are interrelated. And, for the production of food, for example, there's an interlocked system of fields and everybody tends their own field, just like we tend our own life. Some people, we all have different occupations, but they are all necessary and interconnected. There's no occupation that's not important. Taxi drivers are very important, right? How would we get to where we need to go without them? Bus drivers, automobile manufacturers, garbage men, what will we do without them? Doctors and lawyers, we tend to point our finger at them saying they're really important, but what will we do without garbage men, right? Our garbage would stack up, we'd have to burn it maybe, or, this kind of thing. But anyway, all of these things are interconnected. That's the one teaching of this robe. The other one is that because it's patterned after rice fields, it means, may I never go hungry for spiritual nourishment. So those are the two meanings of the Buddha robe. So Ananda further asked his cousin, the Buddha, he said, World Honored One, I heard it said that good friends are half of the great way. And the Buddha said, do not say that, Ananda. Good friends are all of the great way. So if you want to know what Buddhism is, you cannot separate it out from the community. Friends and relationships are primary. It's foundational. We've so far discussed the Buddha, who he was. We've discussed his nirvana. We've discussed the teachings that he gave. And now we're discussing the community. And the community, you cannot have Buddhism without a community. This is so primary. Listen to some of these words from the earliest teachings of the Buddha, called the Dhammapada. If on the great journey of life a person cannot find one who is better or at least as good as himself or herself, let her joyfully travel alone. Right? So importance is placed on who we are in relationship. Who we are in relationship with will affect who we are. Will affect not only who we are, but who we will become. Who we will become is based on who we are with, our companions. And the Buddha said, it's better not to associate someone who is not on the same path with you. But what does that mean? Does that mean they have to be Buddhist? No, that's not what that means. It doesn't mean they have to be Buddhist, but somebody who has an equal striving for living a life of truth and beauty and wisdom. Maybe that's the easiest way I can say that.
Isn't that sort of similar to the saying, birds of a feather flock together?
Yeah, that's right. Birds of a feather flock together. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because what the Buddha taught is not something that is new. This is something that he found through his own experience. And we have aphorisms like that in our own culture. So this isn't something so exotic. Now, how about this next verse? This is kind of a little bit of a twist. It says, if during the whole of one's life, one's whole entire life, an immature person lives with a wise person, that person never knows the path of wisdom as the spoon never knows the taste of soup. Right? So in other words, you can even be in the company of somebody really wise, but not get anything that they're saying or doing. You may not get their wisdom, just as a spoon never tastes the soup that it's placed in. All right? So it's not enough just to have wise friends or wise teachers around you. You have to actually incorporate what they are saying into your own life. Now, next verse says, but if a person watches and sees in only a moment but if a person who watches and sees is only a moment with a wise person, she soon knows the path of wisdom as the tongue knows the taste of soup. So in other words, you don't have to be with a wise person very long. Just be with them for a few minutes. If you are really watching them and noticing and can see their wisdom playing out, not just their words. I'm not talking about words, but also how they live their life, what they do, their action, their activity. Some more, couple more quotes here from the Dhammapada. If you see someone wise who can steer you away from the wrong path, follow that person as you would one who can reveal hidden treasures. Only good can come out of it. So here's one of the benefits of having teachers or friends, right? And this is pointing to the importance of relationship. That the Dharma can only be applied really in relationship. It's not some like personal individual thing. Like you cannot have enlightenment all by yourself and just disregard what's happening in the world around you. That's not really enlightenment. That's just your own ego trip. It has to be taking place in a relationship with other people, in relationship with a teacher, in a relationship with a community of people. He further says, let them admonish or instruct or restrain you from what is wrong. They will be loved by the good, but disliked by the bad. You know, just to be honest here, don't we like when we get approval from somebody and dislike when somebody tells us something we don't want to hear, but we know is good for us, right? Sometimes we refuse good advice because it doesn't come at the right time or it just hurts, but we know there's some hint of truth to it. And so the words of wisdom are oftentimes not comfortable, but they're truthful. So this is something, right? This is something, an important point. And that's why we need to get feedback from people, right? We need feedback to see, how am I on this path? Am I doing this right? We need to check ourselves out. We can't do it by ourselves. So I work with other teachers. You know, I study with other teachers, and I studied with my own teacher for 15 years because I needed to see, I needed to develop trust in myself, right? And so sometimes we don't always try, we second guess, like, am I on the right path? Well, if you're not sure, it's really helpful to hang out with other people. The last one I'll say, make friends with those who are good and true, not with those who are bad and false. Right? Make friends with those who are good and true, not with those who are bad and false. So it's just an admonition to watch. And this is my way of pointing us to the importance of community and relationship. This idea is spread throughout the teachings of the Buddha, throughout Buddhism. And this is the next images I'll show you are mainly of monks. And you can see there are different styles of robes. So the community, the Sangha, is made up of, it's called the fourfold community: monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen. Those four groups of people are totally relying on each other within the Buddhist tradition: monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen. This is also a very, somewhat a narrow view of Sangha. This is perhaps one of the more narrow views of what Sangha is, because Sangha is any relationship that we're in that we have a trusting relationship. So a person doesn't necessarily need to be Buddhist in order to be a Sangha member. You can make Sangha or community from a Buddhist perspective. You can make Sangha or community with anybody that's around you. Not only with human beings, but also with animals, with plants, with the natural world. They are also included in Sangha. But for the sake of for this particular understanding of Sangha, let's just limit it to monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen. These four groups of people are interdependent on each other. And traditionally in Buddhism, the monks and nuns would take vows of poverty. So they were not generating material wealth. They were generating spiritual wealth. That was what they could offer the world, is their spiritual knowledge. And they would offer it to the laymen and laywomen, who themselves would generate material wealth. And they could give, so the laymen and laywomen could give their material wealth to the monks and the nuns on the alms rounds. As you see in this image here down, these are laywomen offering food to the monks in Southeast Asia. And in turn, the monks and the nuns would offer spiritual wealth to the laymen and laywomen. So there's this interdependency going on. The monks and nuns would take vows of poverty to live very simple lives, traditionally 3 robes and 1 bowl. That's all they were given to live on and live very simply. In the Buddha's time, they would sleep in forests, under trees, or maybe huts. That Buddhism has changed a lot, drastically. I'm almost ashamed to call myself a Buddhist these days because I live in a home, I've got a roof over my head and a bed to sleep on. But traditionally, this is the occupation of a monk or a nun, would live very, very simply. And I've had that kind of experience too. My 15 years of training as a monastic, as a monk, I went to Japan, and the only space that we could call ours was the space the size of a tatami mat, which, if you don't know tatami mats, they are 3 feet by 6 feet long. It's a kind of rectangular shape, and you sleep on that tatami mat, you eat on that tatami mat, and you sit in meditation on that tatami mat. And that's where you keep all of your belongings as well. So it was a joyful experience for me, living that simply. I had very little. And for the 15 years I lived in Pennsylvania, I had very little belongings. I relied on the support of the community that would fund our temple. We would offer retreats and Dharma teachings, and in turn receive donations. We were able to live in a building, but that building was not mine. I didn't have to, the building, so I didn't own it. The only thing I owned was a car, which is actually, maybe for some people, that's a big thing. But for me, that's all I owned. And it was a joyful experience to live in that way. The food that I had received was also food that was based on the money that came in for retreats that we offered. So this kind of a relationship, we would offer Dharma and the community would come and offer material supports. So the two are interlocked. It's not like what we call, in Buddhism, what we call it is noble poverty. There's the poverty that we talk about, like, oh, we've got to feed the hungry. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about noble poverty, where you live in total dependence on, or interdependence, a recognition of interdependence of all things.
Before you change the channel, before you change the picture, I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, you said these here were the robes that they normally had in that picture.
Yeah.
So is that kind of what you have around your neck? Is that sort of like the same thing?
It is. It's the exact same pattern. I want to show you something else. I have another robe here. I don't wear this robe all the time. I wear it for special ceremonies. So I'm glad you asked. I wanted to share this with you today. This is another robe that I have. You can see it's much larger. This is an abbreviated Buddha robe, and it's part of the custom in Japan and also in Korea. Korean monks and Japanese monks have this, what's called a rakusu. It's an abbreviated version of the Buddha robe, and this is a large version. So what I do for special occasions, I put it on top of my head as a sign of reverence, and I recite a verse, the verse of the okesa, or the verse of the robe. How great the robe of liberation, a formless field of merit, wrapping ourselves in Buddha's teaching, we free all beings. And after reciting that verse, I'll take it off my head and open it up. So it opens up. I put it, let's see, find the, sorry about that, I gotta find the straps. And then it goes around my shoulders. The right shoulder is always left bare. Sorry, you know what? I opened this up the wrong way. I'm kind of embarrassed here.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It's not your fault. Let's put it on the right way. You probably can't tell, but I can.
So when you wear your full robe, do you wear your abbreviated robe also, or just one or the other?
No, just one or the other. Thank you. Yeah, take this off and put it aside.
Sorry.
No, we don't put them both. You don't need both of them on at the same time. But the abbreviated robe is more for informal kinds of things. And okay. This, so I'm tying a knot. All right. So the right shoulder remains bare.
What's the significance of that, the right shoulder bare?
Wow, that's a great question. Let me think about that one. it doesn't always remain bare. There's times when I think it has to do with custom. To be honest with you, it's the custom of the time of the Buddha. That's how robes were worn, because there are times when both shoulders are covered with the robe, and that's when the precepts are being offered. So if there's a precept ceremony, at least in the Japanese tradition, both shoulders are covered, but the right shoulder is generally left bare. And then there's the straps and folds and things. There are various ways of folding these robes, and there's various complexity to the robes, right? So this covers my whole body.
And you still have the pattern of the rice fields in there? It
has the pattern of the rice fields. So it's harder to perhaps see. I'll try on the video here, but you can see, maybe you can see this. Patches. You see the rectangle here? It's hard to, let me stand, maybe you can see better. I don't know if you can see that very well, but.
Sort of.
Yeah. I can barely hear you, Lisa. I heard you say something about going to a grocery store. Can you speak into your microphone a little bit more? Because I'm not getting that.
Yeah, every once in a while my computer just goes crazy. I don't know.
There you go. I can hear you now.
Okay. When you go to the grocery store, is that when you wear your informal one, or is that not? Right.
Generally, you know what? I'm wearing what's called samue. So that's what's underneath here. I might wear this sometimes. When I was in training for 15 years, I wore this samue all the time. That was my garb. And yeah, I would go to the grocery stores wearing this it's called samue. I didn't have any robe on, not this robe or the smaller robe that you saw. And these days, I generally just wear lay clothing when I go out in public, unless I'm coming from a dharmic activity. So that's how I do it. Sometimes I'll wear my samue, but not so often. Especially as a father, these are really actually quite nice robes, and so I try to keep them as clean as possible and wear them only for special occasions. Other than that, you may not recognize that I'm a Buddhist. Sometimes I will put it out there, but other times not. So that's kind of my choice right now.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I wanted to share that today, so you got a little bit ahead of me. Okay. So let's go. I want to go back to that screen share. All right, so this is one particular community of monks. And this is in Thailand. This image here is of monks receiving alms in Thailand. Look at how that robe looks compared to my robe. This is Japanese. This is a Japanese style. Look at how the robe is turned under. And you can see these two monks here at the head, they are both wearing the robes over both shoulders. So I'm guessing that means it might be a hierarchical kind of thing, that if they may be in a teaching role, or maybe they do that. I'm not sure. I'll just put it there. I'm not sure, but because this other monk behind them, you could see his right shoulder is left bare. Right, but then this one over here, he's got the robes on both shoulders. So I'm not sure why that is. Here's Chinese Buddhist monks. And here too, you see the red, the robe is red, the color is red in this case. And they have what's called a, in Japanese, is called a koromo, this yellowish garment underneath the robe. That's a Chinese addition to the Buddhist garb. And actually, I have that same garment as well, and it's black. And I wear that, again, this is for special occasions. I'll wear that under the Buddha robe. And you can see here that this robe, underneath the robe, has very long sleeves. So the sleeves might drape down to the person's knees. But again, the robe, the Indian layer, this layer that comes from India, drapes over the left shoulder. Here's monks from Thailand. See the slightly different style of robe. Here's a Tibetan Buddhist monks robe and style. And there you can always recognize the Tibetan Buddhist monk style. You see the yellow and red undergarment. And again, the robe is covering the left shoulder. That's how you know it's a Buddhist monk. Shaved head, robe covering the left shoulder. And then from country to country, the customs differ and vary. So underneath the robe, you see this yellow or gold and red collar going on. Here is an example of a American-born Buddhist nun in the Tibetan tradition. So you can see that gold here, that golden collar. And here's her robe covering her left shoulder. Her right shoulder is left bare. She is one of the most famous teachers Buddhist teachers in the world. She's written numerous books on Buddhism and on meditation. So I'd like to share with you, and you can find this, I will stop the recording here. You can find this in your YouTube, in your videos folder. Let's take a look at that. These are monks from Burma. You can see there, the robe again is a little bit different. This young man, this picture is not so clear, but you can see this is a boy and he's wearing a Buddhist robe and he's got his right shoulder bare. And these older monks have their shoulders all covered. How about, this is in the Korean tradition. Again, you have those long sleeves and the gray underrobe. But then this robe is the red robe covering the left shoulder. And here's in the Japanese tradition, that robe, you can see that big ring there. That's just another way of connecting the two parts of the robe. So this relationship between lay and monks, lay people and monks, is one of mutuality. And whenever I would go on the alms rounds, in Japan, there's this wonderful verse that we used to, that is said in Japanese. So we would go from house to house requesting donations, and those donations would come in the form of food or money. And when somebody would place something in your bowl, you would say in Japanese, Zai ho ni se kuroku mujo dambara mitsu gusoko ammanai shi hokkai byodo yaku. And the basic meaning of this particular statement is that, or this particular chant is that there's an exchange. It's recognizing the exchange of material goods and spiritual goods, and that these two things are totally dependent on each other. That you cannot have the spiritual world without the material world. And you cannot have the material world without the spiritual world. The two depend on each other. So a lot of times with spirituality, we think that, oh, I can just leave the world and just be in this kind of spiritual zone and don't have to think about material stuff. But the reality is we do have to think about the material world. With no physical world around us, there is no such thing as a spiritual world. We have to take care of both. And that's one of the central teachings of Buddhism. All right. So I want to talk a little bit more about Sangha and what that means, how that might be or play out with a story of well, it's not really a story, but cleaning the potatoes. If you've ever worked with potatoes before, you know you need to clean them. And if you're making potatoes for a large group of people and you have a bunch of dirty potatoes there, dirt still on them, then these days when you get them at the grocery store, they may not be so dirty. You might not have clumps of dirt on them, but they got to that grocery store. Prior to that, they had a lot of dirt and clumps of dirt stuck to the potatoes. And if you've ever grown potatoes, you can see that. You pull them out of the ground, they're a root vegetable, they're going to have dirt on them. And the way to clean the potatoes is not one by one. That would take a very long time if you have a whole bunch to clean. Rather, you put them all together in a big bucket and put water on them and move them all around. And they get clean, not by just you rubbing them with your thumb or fingers, but by their interaction with the other potatoes. So they're bumping against each other and they're knocking the dirt off of each other. That's an analogy for the way community works, is that we all have our dirt, we all have our junk that's, maybe you can't see it on our physical body, but on our spiritual body, we have junk, we have our own limited sight, and we have our own egos. That's symbolic of the dirt that's on us. And by practicing and living in community, we rub up against others and we might disagree with them. They might say things that are hurtful. We might say things that are hurtful. And that's how, in that rubbing process, that's how we get cleaned off. Right? So it's a culture of group harmony. When you think about harmony, look at these images here of birds flying together in a flock. You see the one that, if you ever look up at the geese, the Canadian geese, as they're flying overhead, flying south for the winter, right there in that V formation. And each goose has its own place. And the head goose actually is always changing. So the head goose might take the brunt of the air that's coming at its head, but then it gets tired and it drops back, and then there's a new head. There's a new head goose, and they know how to work together. It'd be much more difficult to fly solo, long distance, than it is to fly as a group, to fly as a flock together. It's much easier for the aerodynamically, it's much easier for geese to fly together as a flock. So you can also see like this whole gathering of birds here flying together, and they don't bump into each other's wings, right? Ants, colonies of ants or bees too, they have this similar way of interacting with each other. If you take one ant out of its colony and put it someplace else, it gets confused. It doesn't know what to do or where to go. But when you place that ant in the colony where it's native to, the interaction with other ants, it knows what to do and where to go. It knows what needs to be done. So that's kind of a symbol for Sangha. That's the idea behind Sangha in a Buddhist community. This is a quote from Zen Master Dogen. So Zen Master Dogen lived in the 13th century, about 800 years ago. And he writes, the assembly is referring to the group of monks and nuns in this case. When the assembly is sitting, sit together with them. And sitting means to sit in meditation. When the assembly is sitting in meditation, sit together with them. As the assembly gradually lies down, to go to sleep at night. Lie down also, go to sleep. Inactivity and stillness at one with the community throughout deaths and rebirths do not separate from the monastery. Standing out has no benefit. Being different from others is not our conduct. So this is I think this is a challenge to most. Maybe, maybe Michael could speak to this a little bit about, working in the military, right? There might be this also prevention of standing out. Standing out has no place in certain communities. And it's really true for Buddhist communities as well. So to stand out means try not to be different. Or if you are going to do something different from others, don't put it in other people's face. Just do it quietly. So when I had an opportunity to actually practice this when I was living in Japan in a monastery with other monks. That's what we did. That was the practice. You wake up at the same time as everybody else. You go to sleep at the same time. You do all things in concert with everybody else. That's how things worked. Now I don't live in that kind of a situation right now. I have my own family, my wife, my son, my in-laws live down the road. So it's a different kind of relationship. However, this particular saying has really stuck with me. I still like to eat together with everybody, right? And I try to, there's certain rhythms that we get into as a family. And maybe you know this from your own families. We get into certain rhythms. And little children love to be in a certain rhythm. Take them out of that rhythm and they get really anxious. I know my son, when he gets out of his particular rhythm, he's wondering what's going on. Why is this happening? He gets anxious or things like that. But sometimes he really likes it though too. Right? But anyways, getting into a pattern, into a flow with a whole community, like a flock of birds, right? That's the practice. And the point there is to diminish ego, is to rub off that dirt from the potatoes. In our culture, we have this culture of hyper-individualism. And just think about this image of the Lone Ranger, right? The Superman character. I love Superman, by the way. I love Spider-Man. But this speaks to a culture of hyper-individualism where we want to be the hero, or we want to have heroes, and the one lone guy who can go out there and put an end to all of the injustices in the world is kind of something that we aspire to. But it has its limitations, because we can see in reality, does that really work? Right? Does it really work to have like this superhero guy? Is there such thing as a superhero? Does any of you know like one person in your life that is a superhero, can take care of everybody else's problems? I'd like to meet that person. I'm not that person, and I've not met that person. But as a community, as a collective, we can accomplish a lot. There's a Haitian saying. My wife lived in Haiti for 5 years, and there's a Haitian saying, what is it? Mem ampil shai palu, which means, it's translated as many hands make for light work. Right? So if we work together, then the work that we do is much easier. But if we all try to do things all by ourselves, it's going to be much more difficult. Now, there's an idea that Buddhists are maybe kind of isolated from society. They want to do their own thing in their own corner and not be bothered with the world. And this, if there's nothing that I teach today, it's that cannot be further from the truth. So I'm going to share with you a couple of different examples of that. This is from a Zen monk named SOEN NAKAGAWA. He died maybe 25 years ago or so. He says, "You are not just here for yourself alone, but for the sake of all sentient beings." It means all beings. "Keep your mind pure and warm." And this is from the Dalai Lama. Maybe some of you have seen his image before or even heard him talk. He's got lots of YouTube videos. I can't recommend listening to him enough. He's just a beautiful human being. He says, "The motivation to achieve Buddhahood in order to save all sentient beings is really a marvelous determination. That person becomes very courageous, warm-hearted, and useful in society." So I want to highlight that term, being useful in society. So if you want to, in other words, from the Buddhist perspective, if you want to attain Buddhahood, that's the goal. If we're going to talk about a goal in Buddhism, is the attainment of becoming a Buddha or being a Buddha. A person who strives to be Buddha-like, awakened, is somebody who is useful in society. It doesn't have to, this is not limited to monks and nuns. This can be anybody. Here are the, so there's a lot of different traditions of, there's a lot of different branches of Buddhism. And this chart gives us a nice, like an easy to understand breakdown of Buddhism. So you have in the 5th century BC, you have Gautama Buddha. That's the original, that's the historical Buddha, right? Siddhartha, who we talked about 2 lectures ago. And from him, there's these 2 branches that develop. The first is the Theravadan, so the Theravadan is the modern name for this particular school of Buddhism. And this particular Buddhism school is found mostly in Southeast Asia, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, right? That's this one here. But then you have also the development of what's called Mahayana Buddhism. So this is it's a somewhat, there's some major similarities between these 2 schools, but there's some identifiable differences as well. And you have all these different branches within Mahayana Buddhism. So Vajrayana is one, and this is mainly in Tibet. In China, you have Chan and Zen. You also have Pure Land in China, Pure Land Buddhism. Jodo Shinshu in Japan. So Pure Land in China and Jodo Shinshu in Japan, same thing, but different culture. And humanistic Buddhism, Taiwan, Japan, China. Shingon in Japan and Nichiren in Japan. So we'll go over some of the differences between these different schools in just a moment. I just kind of put that in your mind there. We're going to go over, there's definite differences between these different schools of Buddhism. But one of the things that they have, the similarity is this idea of the Bodhisattva. And this is a Mahayana Buddhist concept called the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is, from a Mahayana Buddhist perspective, this is a being who strives for the awakening of all beings, and they will put off their own enlightenment until all beings throughout space and time have attained enlightenment. So that's the vow of the Bodhisattva. That's a vow that I've taken, is to, even though I myself am not yet a Buddha, I'm not yet awakened for sure. I know that. I will vow, my vow is to do everything I can to wake up all sentient beings. In other words, to be of service to others. Just keep it simple like that. Here's the Bodhisattva vow. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates, that means teachings, are boundless. I vow to master them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. So just to stop here for a sec, the screen sharing. So we need to be clear, like earlier forms of Buddhism were geared towards waking up to becoming a Buddha, and that this kind of waking up took place over a long period of time, through many lifetimes, right? The Buddha's present incarnation was preceded by many lifetimes of practice. And so the idea is that you have to practice a lot of meditation, and then you'll wake up and become a Buddha at some point, maybe in a future life, but probably not in this time around. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense for most people, because most people can't spend that amount of time meditating or become renunciants. They have families and jobs and things. And so Buddhism evolved to include other people who didn't have the same circumstances as a monk or a nun. And the different branches of Buddhism evolved so that to incorporate those folks that couldn't meditate for long hours on end. And the development of this idea of the Bodhisattva, that you don't have to become a Buddha. You can work towards becoming a Buddha, but you can still wake up other people even before you become a Buddha. In fact, you can put off your enlightenment. A Bodhisattva is one who's ready to attain enlightenment, but they put it off until all beings become enlightened together. There's another example of community, right? It's not my personal enlightenment, but it's the enlightenment of all beings together. And this is what the Buddha originally, it said that when he woke up, when he had his enlightenment experience, he said, I and all beings together, past, present, and future, attain enlightenment. So his enlightenment wasn't a personal thing. It was a relational event that included everybody and everything in the universe. And that's what is strived for. I don't know, I'm a fan of the Beastie Boys. I used to listen to them all the time when I was a kid, and some of their stuff is a little definitely questionable, but the group changed over time, and one of the members, actually I think the whole group, they got involved in Buddhism and freed Tibet, and they even wrote a song called the Bodhisattva Vow. So I love this song. I just want to read it to you. But if you're interested in the Beastie Boys have the sound of Tibetan instruments in the background when they do this particular song. The Bodhisattva path is one of power and strength, a strength from within to go the length. Seeing others are as important as myself, I strive for a happiness of mental wealth. With the interconnectedness that we share as one, every action that we take affects everyone. So in deciding for what a situation calls, there is a path for the good of all. So that's a reference again to this Bodhisattva path. And there are key Bodhisattvas throughout Buddhist literature. One of the main ones is Avalokiteshvara. That's the name. Avalokiteshvara is the Bodhisattva of compassion. And she is sometimes, she's depicted in different forms. So this one on the right here is the Bodhisattva of 1,000 arms, 1,000 hands. So you can see, you can't see them all, but you see all of these arms, and each hand has something in it as a way to help human beings to end their suffering. So the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, her name literally means one who hears the cries of the world. So to hear the suffering of the world and to respond to that suffering. Kishitigharbha is another important bodhisattva, earth store bodhisattva. This bodhisattva takes care of children, the incarcerated, those who have children who died early, either been aborted or died through illness of the mother or something like that. And also travelers, wanderers. So you see this image, these statues of Kishitigharbha along the roadside, often in Japan. Manjushri is the bodhisattva of wisdom. And this bodhisattva carries a sword that cuts through delusion. The sword is symbolic of that kind of wisdom that can see through the BS of the world. Samantabhadra is the bodhisattva of action. So this bodhisattva takes action. He does things to help others in whatever way possible. So Buddhism, so we're talking really Buddhism before it meets the Western world. It starts out here in India. It goes south to Sri Lanka. It goes east to Southeast Asia, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, and then also north to China, Korea, and then Japan. And now it's in Africa, Europe, South and North America. So I want to mention that there are different schools within Buddhism. The Zen school of Buddhism emphasizes meditation. That's the school that I'm a part of. But the Pure Land school of Buddhism emphasizes the name of the Buddha of infinite light, Amitabha. And Pure Land Buddhists, they might practice meditation, they might not, but their key practice is chanting. One of their key practices is chanting the name of the Buddha of infinite light. Namantabu, namandabu, 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 namandabu. You're just chanting it again and again as their form of worship. There's a Nichiren school of Buddhism that is devoted to a particular sutra called the Lotus Sutra. And their practice is to chant the name of the Lotus Sutra. The sutra are the teachings of the Buddha, the written down teachings of the Buddha. And that particular sutra is considered to be the Buddha himself in the sutra. I think I'm going to pass over this stuff on Zen. We had one full class on Zen, well, maybe, but see, we're getting to close to our time here. Well, let me just say this about Zen. So it's a school that emphasizes introspection, and there's something what's called the koan. In koan, there's hundreds of koans that help to open the mind up, to illuminate the reality of the world. And a monk might practice, or even a layperson might practice koan introspection, where they look at a story and they'll contemplate that story for weeks or months on end until they have a breakthrough, a mental breakthrough, where there's a sense of the mind opening, liberation from past ways of thinking and being. This is part of the school that I've been raised in myself. But koans like maybe you've heard before. What is the sound of one hand clapping, right? That's a kind of koan. But here's a koan that my teacher would give to us. What is your face before your parents were born? In other words, who are you? Who were you before your parents were born? And to come up with an intellectual understanding of that is really not the point. I mean, you could answer that question right here and right now, but most likely won't be a really deep and penetrating experience, right? Because it's coming from the intellect and from the head. So a monk might spend several weeks or months focusing on that particular koan. The most common and popular form of Buddhism is the Buddhism called Pure Land. So meditation is really not a popular form of Buddhism, although it's been taken up by a lot of Western Buddhists. But the form of Buddhism that really has mass appeal in China, Korea, and Japan is Pure Land Buddhism. This is the form of Buddhism where one attains enlightenment through the repetition of the name of the Buddha. All right. And this particular school of Buddhism felt that the corruption in society is so deep that it's impossible to attain enlightenment through one's own efforts, that you had to rely 100% on the power of the Buddha, called tariki, other power. All right. So the Zen school is jiriki, self-power. And Pure Land school is more emphasis on tariki, other power. And there's an image of the Buddha of infinite light. And actually, there's not these clear separations between Zen and Pure Land. I want to just give you an example of myself. I teach Buddhism before COVID. I teach Buddhism at the Pure Land Temple in Des Moines. There's a Pure Land Buddhist temple in Des Moines. I teach there. So there's not this like big wall that separates Buddhist schools as I'm presenting it here. But here's an image of the Buddha of infinite light coming down from the Pure Land to kind of take up his followers at their death and lead them to the Pure Land. All right, now we're moving into, this is some interesting stuff, is how Buddhism moved into Europe, North America, South America, Africa. You have a lot of ways that this happened. Perhaps the primary way was through the immigration of Asian Buddhists from their homeland to as refugees or immigrants to North and South America and Europe. They brought with them their own customs and religion, and they brought with them their own ministers who would take care of the needs of their family. That's probably the primary way that Buddhism went from Asia to non-Asian countries like our own. Well, I shouldn't say it's non-Asian, but to the United States, for example. There's other ways as well, and I want to talk about those. So in these images here, you can see, this is my teacher, actually, a young version of her. She was, I want to say in her late 40s, early 50s in this picture. This was probably the 1970s, I'm sorry, 1980s, early 80s. And she is with here 2 Catholic nuns. This is her teacher, Oyama Roshi. She lived in a women's temple, a women's monastery for 8 years. And during that 8-year period, they had exchanges with Catholic contemplatives. In other words, monks and nuns that were in the Catholic tradition in Europe, Belgium, France. And every so often, the nuns or the monks would come to Japan, and they would live in the Japanese Buddhist temple for a 1-month period and learn from the Buddhists. And then the Buddhists would go to Europe to a Catholic convent or a Catholic monastery and learn from the Christians for a month. The Christian contemplatives, these monks and nuns, they would learn from them. They would participate in their services. So that's one way that Buddhism came this direction. Now, in the 1960s, you have this interchange between, on the left here is a famous Catholic monk named Thomas Merton. And he's fantastic. He's written a lot of books on spirituality and that kind of thing. If you ever get a chance, or if you're interested in that, look him up. He's got wonderful and very powerful writing. And this is an early meeting with the Dalai Lama. So this is a very young version of the Dalai Lama, 1960s. So this is 50 years ago. Thomas Merton has since died, but he wrote a journal on his Asian journey. So he went to Thailand, he went to other Asian countries, and he met with Buddhists in those countries. And it deeply affected his own understanding of God. The other person I want to mention now is a man named, a Vietnamese monk named Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Vietnamese Zen master and just an amazing, incredible human being. In fact, he's still living. I want to say he's 93, 92, 93, but he's very, very ill. And it's not certain if he has much longer to live, maybe days, maybe days yet. I was privileged enough to experience being in his presence. And he had retreats that 900, the retreat that I went to with him, it was a 3-week retreat, had 900 people in attendance from all over the world. This was in France. He's written over 100 books on Buddhism. And he's very easy to understand. Most of his writing is fairly easy to understand. He writes in a way that's very clear. So he's another person that you may want to check out online or through his books. But he says here, he's also one of the people that have really brought this idea of mindfulness to the front and center. He says, mindfulness must be engaged. Once there is seeing, there must be acting. Otherwise, what's the use of seeing? So I want to talk a little bit about what's called engaged Buddhism, because there's this idea, I think, that Buddhists just kind of like sit by themselves and do their own thing and are not really engaged in the world, but that's not the case. Thich Nhat Hanh actually met with Martin Luther King during the civil rights movement. And it's because, there's this YouTube video I want to show you. It's because he's interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. And so check this YouTube video out. Maybe we'll, tell you what, maybe we'll see that towards the end, but in it, Thich Nhat Hanh talks about his interaction with Martin Luther King, and that it's because of that interaction that Martin Luther King later came out, or shortly later came out against the Vietnam War. So Thich Nhat Hanh actually called Martin Luther King a bodhisattva. Remember that word, bodhisattva? He thought that Martin Luther King was a bodhisattva. And Martin Luther King, in turn, nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Peace Prize. All right, there's some things here I think we're not going to get to today, but there's some interactions between Thich Nhat Hanh and Thomas Merton as well. That's the monk back here on the left that we saw with the Dalai Lama. Thich Nhat Hanh, Thomas Merton also met with Thich Nhat Hanh. So here are some activities of engaged Buddhists, right? Working to eliminate the caste system in India, working to eliminate systemic racism in the United States, working to end nuclear proliferation, addressing climate change. These are the activities of Buddhists here that are engaged. Taking care of orphans in Japan, ending violence against women and girls, building schools that address bullying. My teachers, one of my teachers' teachers does that. He runs a school next to the temple, and they address the issue of bullying in Japan. They have students come that are bullied, and he teaches them how to take care of themselves. Working in prisons as chaplains. Okay, so that's just a very short bit on engaged Buddhism. And I don't want to paint Buddhism as this like all great Buddhist tradition. As much as I love it and I'm a part of it, there are still, there's a dark side to Buddhism that we cannot ignore. There's been abuses of power amongst my own colleagues in this country. Some Zen teachers have abused their authority in ways that, is not good. During World War II, Japanese monks, temples housed soldiers. Buddhist teachings were used as a way to encourage kamikaze pilots to end their life for the sake of the nation. And if you look at the kamikaze planes, they have the image of the cherry blossom. Some of them have the image of the cherry blossom on the side of the plane, the decal of the cherry blossom. The cherry blossom is a Buddhist symbol in Japan. It means impermanence, that everything is impermanent, everything changes. And that concept of impermanence was co-opted by the Japanese nationalistic government at the time to encourage the Japanese citizens and the warriors to dive bomb Pearl Harbor. So this is a dark side of Buddhism. Another thing that's going on in modern society is discrimination against the Rohingya people in Myanmar. The Rohingya are a minority Muslim population in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. And Buddhist monks have been discriminating, have been leading events that discriminate against these people. So these are just some of the dark sides of Buddhism. Every religion we encounter will have a dark side. And we, you know, I want to keep our view balanced. All right.